Money Talks, I'm Cathy Yang, your intel in the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, a record year for 𝐓𝐿𝐿 investment approvals, even as foreign direct investment numbers collapse. We check in on our economic zones amid the corruption scandal and government's big bold reforms with Philippine Economic Zone Authority Director General Teresa Panga joining us live in studio. The impeachment complaint filed against President Marcos is a distraction for foreign investors already sidelined by the flood control scandal, says PCCI's Perry Ferrer. We have an excerpt from Thought Leaders.
Impeachment, I'm not into politics, but it does distract. So, whether it's the president, the vice president, or whoever, or both.
And the International Monetary Fund sees the Philippine economy expanding at a slower pace until next year. Former Senator Bong Revilla has surrendered to authorities after the Sandigan Bayan issued an arrest warrant against him and 6 others over a flood control project in Pandi, Bulacan. Revilla arrived at Camp Crame shortly before 9 p.m. on Monday, accompanied by PNP Acting Chief Lieutenant General 𝐩𝐚𝐿𝐿 Jr. This is Revilla's second time to be detained, the first being in 2014 when he was implicated in the pork barrel scam. The Sandigan Bayan found probable cause to arrest Revilla and 6 DPWH officials over a 92.8 million peso flood work in Pandi, Bulacan, which investigators tagged as non-existent. NBI agents arrested former Bulacan 1st District Engineers Bryce Hernandez at the Senate after attending the Senate Blue Ribbon hearing. Others co-accused surrendered before the NBI-NCR division in Calao, Manila. In a Facebook Live, Revilla maintained his innocence.
Nakakalungkot po, parang wala yatang due process.
Yes.
Pero ganun pa man, haharapin ko to ng walang takot. At alam kong hindi ako papabayaan ng Diyos dahil wala po akong kasalanan dito.
Meanwhile, in yesterday's resumption of the Senate Blue Ribbon hearings, DPWH Undersecretary Arthur Bisnar admitted that field validation of flood control projects needs to start all over again due to wrong grid coordinates. Former Public Works Chief Manuel Bonoan explained that due to the lack of time, he submitted location-based coordinates to the palace instead of the more accurate as-stake coordinates. DOJ Acting Secretary Frederick Vida, for his part, said of the 421 projects initially tagged as ghost, only 14 are truly non-existent. While Senator Ping Lacson had something to say to his committee's critics right at the top of the hearing.
As the chairman of this committee, I say to you, shut the F up. Your noise will not silence the truth. Neither does it provide any help in our investigation. Your noise cannot convict and won't even indict the malefactors in this flood control mess. Only evidence does.
This morning, DPWH Secretary Vince Dizon is at Sandigan Bayan to testify in the trial of ex-lawmaker 𝐓𝐿𝐿𝐷 and several DPWH officials involving an alleged ghost project in Oriental Mindoro. The Philippine economy may expand at a slower pace until next year as global uncertainty and the corruption scandal continue to weigh on growth. In its latest World Economic Outlook, the International Monetary Fund now sees Philippine GDP growing by 5.6% this year. While that's within the government's 5 to 6% target, it is slightly below its earlier estimate of 5.7%. The multilateral lender also trimmed its 2027 growth forecast to 5.8% from 6%. It cited weaker capital investment and spillover effects from a slower 2025 outlook, which is now pegged at 5.1%. The downgrade follows weaker growth in the third quarter, when GDP grew by 4%, the slowest in over 4 years. That's amid slower government spending tied to the flood control corruption scandal and climate-related shocks. Looking ahead, the IMF expects growth to rebound to 6% by 2028, driven by strong consumer demand, higher investment, and continued policy support. The Philippine Economic Zone Authority is on a strong approvals run, even as the broader investment story has been shaken by corruption scandals. As big, bold reforms are rolled out to restore confidence, PCCCI sits at the front line of how locators and foreign investors really judge the Philippines today. With us now for more is the Director General of the Philippine Economic Zone Authority, 𝐩𝐴. It's good seeing you again, DG Teo. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Ms. Cathy. Thank you for having me in your program. It's a pleasure.
And congratulations on 30 years. That went last month, and with some numbers to boot in terms of exports, quality jobs, as well as investments.
Yes, we just celebrated our 30th year anniversary, and so we feel that we have become more relevant and vibrant as we attract more investments into the country. And so with our 30-year history in PCCCI, we can provide for the blueprint as we can provide for the best location and business ecosystem for our investors.
Well, that run of a streak in approvals has continued for all of 2025. We've seen a record number of approvals, but when you take a look at the collapse in foreign direct investments, that's where the concern comes in, because there's a bit of a gap between, a huge gap in fact, between the approvals and the actual investments. Why do you think that is?
Well, the type of investments that we cater to in PCCCI are what we call administrative byproduct. So usually there is a gestation period when these investments are translated into projects. But there's a high probability of these projects being translated into realized investments. And so we continue to attract investments because the investors that we cater to in PCCCI are investing in the future rather than the present. And I think it speaks volumes of the trust and confidence that they have in the Philippines and in PCCCI in general.
But it also speaks about governance and the way they see risks in terms of how the government handles it. That gestation period, has that become a longer sort of a timeline because of the concern, the ongoing concern on the flood control scandal?
Well, it's a cause for concern. I think all these political risks and all this noise about corruption in government is definitely impacting on our viability as an investment destination. But the upside is we haven't seen that impact yet. In terms of gestation period, usually when investors apply with us for projects, they have to show proof already of their lease contract or proof of ownership over land and building. And so it makes sense for them to immediately start out with their project. So usually the gestation period would range from 2 to 4 months for those occupying already existing buildings and up to 2 years for really greenfield investments, so that those that will put up new buildings for their projects.
So which ones are maturing, those nearing 4 months, and when will that show up as actual investments?
Well,
and jobs?
Yes, so consistently the top 3 sectors that we have in PCCCI are those into manufacturing, which account for 58%, those into ecozone development, 29%, and 11% by IT BPM sector. And as soon as they sign their registration agreement with PCCCI, usually we give them within 30 days. And they do sign their registration agreement because in most cases they're ready to deploy their project, they're ready to start with commercial operations, and despite all this political risk happening.
Despite all these political risks happening, but for sure they've had more questions than usual. I mean, what sort of conversations did you go into these existing locators and the would-be locators since the scandal broke out?
Well, yes. Usually they ask us about our ability, our capacity to support and grow their investments, particularly how we can protect their investments. But you know, our selling point to them, what we usually tell them is that in PCCCI, at least in the economic zones, they can be in a safer haven for their investments. We've gone through this in our 30-year history of PCCCI, and so far, particularly when we assumed into office, when we were appointed, we have had a strong growth trajectory of investments and increasing at that consistently. And so we will see the same trend. In fact, from our 262 billion in investments, we're already projecting a 300 billion target in investments for next year. And we don't see any signs of slowing down as long as government can immediately resolve all these issues, so that finally we can tell the global community that we are open for business and that we are ready to welcome their investments into the Philippines.
There's a big caveat there, as long as the government resolves these issues. So what's holding them back?
Well, we can see from the pronouncements of the President, from the Cabinet, that they're well-meaning with their resolve to finally put an issue closure to this. And only when we can hold people, those really responsible for this mess, to be accountable for their actions, can we show the Filipino people and the global community that we mean well when we say that we will put an end to this corruption, and that more importantly, we can put in the safety nets, all these reforms, so that finally we can have a corruption-free government in
So
the
that's
Philippines.
what you're getting from the locators.
Yes.
They want to see a resolution. Is it the existing ones or the new ones, the prospective locators?
They're more particular about the flood control projects, but anything that has to do with improving ease of doing business, anything that has to do with better governance, I think can be a more effective tool in attracting investments more than the fiscal incentives.
Well, let's dive into the big, bold reforms, because that came through from January 16th. And just to look at the 4 initiatives here, they include restoring the CARS program, that's one, visa entry for Chinese visitors for 15 days, the BIR's new digital audit, and a single window platform at customs to cut the trade bottlenecks. Mm-hmm. What sort of initial reaction have you had from the locators so far on these initiatives?
Well, these are all obviously bold reforms, and these are all welcome development to our ecozone community of investors. I think foremost is how we can get our acts together in government. We now have this create more law in effect, which allows us to grant the most generous fiscal incentives for investors. But unless we are consistent and harmonized with how we implement the law, then that's the only way we can really grant the fiscal incentives as promised in the law and in our registration agreements with PESA.
Exactly. It's all in the execution. As you say, it's more than just fiscal incentives.
Yes.
So with these reforms and trying to get that act together, how is PESA going to help and ensure that, it's a seamless transition from what they see as governance risk to, let's start doing business again with the Philippines?
Well, yes. So as we always say it in PESA, we cannot do this alone. And so we reach out to our partner agencies. Usually we engage with them through a MOA.
Which ones?
Like the likes of DNR, we have MOA with Bureau of Customs, with the Bureau of Immigration. Those agencies that really deal with us closely in facilitating permits and investments of our investors. And the other way is we're investing a lot in automation. I think we're among the very few in government that have already rolled out cashless and paperless transaction system. And so by engaging with other agencies to do the same, we can really enhance some more our ease of doing business and our facilitation of investments and permits.
In fact, I spoke with Perry Ferrer of PCCI just about 24 hours ago, and more than ease of doing business, it's ease of operating business here in the Philippines. I've also spoken with 𝐷𝐷𝐿𝐻𝐽𝐺. He's the former deputy governor of the Bangko Sentral, and he's also now the principal advisor for Global Source Partners. And I did ask him, would these 4 move the needle? And this is what he had to say. Let's listen in.
I think all of this can move the needle, but just a little bit. Because the problem is about governance, it is about corruption. And that is behind the drop in FDI as well as in terms of domestic investment. So in other words, the issue is not just about ease of doing business, ensuring that policies are in place to avoid corruption.
So how do you convince locators then, the current and prospective, that they can trust the process and they're better off trusting the government here rather than the ASEAN? The neighbors are also providing the same fiscal incentives, the same kind of perks.
Yeah.
What makes us different?
Well, if we look at the bold reforms being presented by government, I would say that these are really very effective reforms. These are new reforms being introduced to our investors. And I would say that this will help us a lot in attracting more investments into the country. I think how we are different from the rest of ASEAN is because in the case of PEZA, we've long been into these eco zones. Actually, not just with PEZA, 30 years in history, but predating us is the EPSA, way back in 1969. So we have the blueprint. We know we have what it takes to protect and grow their investments into the country. And so that is our value proposition for our investors. In PEZA, there is only one government in the economic zones, and so it helps a lot in facilitating their investments.
Very quickly, what is it going to mean for jobs? You've mentioned a projected increase in actual investments. What is it going to mean for the workers?
Well, these investments that we attract, once these are realized, this will then translate into generation of the much-needed jobs, especially not just in terms of numbers, but quality jobs. Like, for instance, the two main drivers of growth are our electronics and our IT BPM. And so the strategy of PEZA is if we can create more eco zones in rural and new growth areas, then we can provide for more livelihood, support communities, and especially generate more jobs for our Filipinos.
Can you give a ballpark number?
Well, right now we're 1.8 million in direct jobs. We are projecting 100,000 new jobs this year. The big bulk of that will be coming from IT BPO. I think they doubled the level of jobs being created by our manufacturing sector.
All right, we'll leave it at that on that positive note. Thank you so much, and keep us
Thank
up
you
to
very
speed
much.
with all the investment approvals. Thank you, DG Teo, Teresa Panga of PEZA. And you're watching Money Talks. Coming up, the impeachment complaint filed against President Marcos is seen as a distraction by a business group, PCCI. And world leaders gather in Davos for the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. 𝐷𝐻𝐿𝐵𝐻 says it recognizes democratic processes following the filing of an impeachment complaint against President Bongbong Marcos. While the palace is yet to receive an official copy, Palace Press Officer Undersecretary Claire Castro assures they will respect the process and trusts Congress to act with integrity.
Ang Pangulo po ay naniniwala na ang mga mababatas natin ay gagamit ng kanilang pag-iisip, kanilang puso, at sila ay naaayon sa batas at hindi para sa pansariling kapakanan lamang.
This marks the first impeachment complaint against President Marcos nearly 4 years into his term. It was filed by a lawyer, Andre De Jesus, and endorsed by Pusong Pinoy Party List Representative Jet Nisay. The president is accused of violating the Constitution and betraying public trust over the ICC arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte in March. The complaint also claims the chief executive is unfit to serve due to drug addiction, as claimed by his very own sister, Senator Amy Marcos. Other grounds include Marcos's alleged failure to veto unprogrammed appropriations and unconstitutional provisions in the 2023 to 2026 national budgets. It further alleges kickbacks from flood control projects and claims the Independent Commission for Infrastructure, or ICI, was used to target opponents and shield allies. Meanwhile, Nisay addressed questions over his endorsement. He was earlier named by the ICI among lawmakers allegedly linked to contractors involved in government infrastructure projects. In November, the commission recommended filing charges against him and other so-called contractors. The impeachment complaint filed against President Marcos is a distraction for foreign investors already sidelined by the flood control scandal, says the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Here's an excerpt of my thought leader's interview with PCCI President President Perry Ferrer.
Whether it's impeachment on the president or the vice president, for us, let's fix first on what we have. Let's restore the confidence of the Filipinos, then the foreign community. But let's first show the 118 million or 119 million Filipinos that we're going to go through this reform. We're going to build a better Philippines, a transparent and with a roadmap for the future. Impeachment, I'm not into politics, but it does distract. So, whether it's the president or the vice president or whoever, or both, let's just put that aside. I hate to say
it's out there right now in the news, and what do we tell the foreign investors then? What is the kind of line then that you'd come to them for? I mean, the investment pledges are up, yes, when you check out the eco zones, but they haven't really been realized, and we've seen a collapse in the foreign direct investments last year.
There's a lot of pledges. There's a lot of pledges, and if you were a foreign investor and you hear it from the ground, from the foreign chambers or very specific country chambers, because before they invest, they check. How are you doing there? And if there's nothing good to say, they're going to put a hold. Because there are other countries also offering very good incentives. We're not the only one. We're after a few of those investments going around now. And there's not a lot of them. So each of the countries are trying to grab whatever they can bring into their country. So if there's distraction similar to what we have now, it's not even related to business. So it's related to corruption, mishandling that affected their own citizens.
Catch the full interview on Thought Leaders on One News and on its Facebook and YouTube channels. And that same view is shared by PCCI's Vice President for Trade and Industry. An economist even sees the impeachment as a threat if tensions become disruptive. Amy Atienza has details.
Business groups say the government's big, bold reforms launched recently is a credible step toward rebuilding investor confidence. This comes after multilateral lenders have cut the growth forecast of the Philippines for 2026 and 2027. But the impeachment complaint filed against the president can disrupt that. For Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry Vice President for Trade and Industry, this can be a mere distraction to reforms and efforts done in the business sector.
We are in the midst of big and bold economic reforms for 2026 as announced by the economic team last Friday. And then first thing in the morning, Monday, you come to us with an impeachment which is nothing but a political exercise. I am not saying na walang kwenta ito, but this will derail any and all economic efforts that both the business sector and the government has been pushing for.
Ang added that the attention gained by the filed impeachment complaint could heavily affect investments by bigger entities in the country.
If I am a businessman, I am an investor, what is the first thing I look at? Stability and predictability of the country. This sends very negative and wrong image.
RCBC Chief Economist 𝐷𝐿𝐿, however, acknowledged that the impeachment is part of a democracy. But if more tension arises, it could be a huge threat to the sector.
Pero kung disruptive kasi, kung may element of uncertainty, doon magkakaproblema. No? Halimbawa, may threat na may destabilization. Or kung merong yung wala sa usual na conventional processes. No, yung democratic process, doon magkakaproblema.
Kapatid Amy Atienza, we are One News.
Let's check on the markets now. No trading in the U.S. yesterday in observance of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But stock futures point to a sharp decline when the markets open later tonight, Manila time. The Dow, the S&P, and the Nasdaq are all down by about 1% each. Asian markets also in the red this Tuesday. Australia's ASX 200 slipping 0.4%. South Korea's Kospi and Japan's Nikkei 225 both fall by about 1% each. Let's take a look at our own markets. PCCI opens this Tuesday higher by less than 0.1%, 6,441. The stock market slid Monday by 0.4% as investors opted to pocket recent gains. The broader all-shares index fell by 0.2%, with the local counters mostly in the red. Let's take a look at the Philippine peso. Opens today unchanged, 59.44 to the dollar. Peso weakened yesterday by 9 centavos as Trump's fresh tariff threats dented risk sentiment. The 10-year government bond yields ticked up 6.052% from the previous close of 6.048%. Here are the headlines from around the globe. In the U.S., President Trump told Norway's prime minister that his aggressive moves to acquire Greenland stems from last year's decision not to award him the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump said he no longer felt, quote, an obligation to think purely of peace. The Peace Prize ultimately went to Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who gave the medal to Trump during her visit at the White House. The Norwegian Nobel Committee had already stressed that the prize is non-transferable. In Switzerland, the World Economic Forum has opened its annual meeting in Davos, with over 60 heads of state expected to attend in person, including leaders of 6 of the G7 nations, which the WEF president called historic. This year's meeting is anchored on dialogue, focusing on the environment, AI, climate, and economic growth. But the event of nearly 3,000 attendees is overshadowed by geopolitical tensions. The WEF meeting will run until Friday. And in Italy, the world of fashion mourns the death of Valentino Garavani, one of the great 20th century designers at the age of 93. Known only by his first name, Valentino died in his home in Rome. Valentino retired in 2008, but his so-called Valentino Red made a lasting mark in the industry. And before we go, the Les Miserables World Tour Spectacular officially opens in Manila. The production runs until March 1st at the theater at Soler. The cast features Filipino world-class talent, including Lea Salonga as Madame Thénardier, Rachel Ango as Fantine, Emily Bautista as Eponine, and Red Concepcion as Thénardier. That is it for Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time. Have a great day ahead.